My name is Lara Klein. I am a senior studying English as a multidisciplinary honors student in the Commonwealth Honors College at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Today I will be sharing my research on eating disorders in adolescents during the time of COVID-19. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty of my research, I would like to share why I picked this topic and why it is so close to my heart. Last summer, I worked as a unit supervisor for girls ages 10 to 11. One day, a counselor from another unit pulled me aside and told me she saw one of my campers throwing up in the bathroom. I brought the camper to the health center under the impression that she was not feeling well. As I walked the child to the health center, I instinctively knew something was off. She was not clutching her stomach or complaining that anything hurt or was bothering her. I took her to the health center, they gave her ginger ale, and sent us on our way. I was still puzzled by the interaction and what had occurred. Later that day, I was talking to one of the maintenance staff about what had occurred. Then she proceeded to tell me that she had seen the child in the bathroom on multiple occasions vomiting. I reported the issue to our camp social worker. He then proceeded to tell me that I needed to talk to the child to find out more information about her ventures in the restroom. I was in disbelief. I was not a social worker. I was not qualified to have this type of conversation with a 10-year-old girl. A 10-year-old who looked like skin and bones and would need professional help. Not me. I sat with her in the back of the arts and crafts shack to talk. I was in disbelief as to some of the questions that left my mouth. Is vomiting something you do a lot? Yes, she answered. How often do you go to the bathroom? Every meal, she said. The counselors let me go and they don't question it. Does it make you feel good when you throw up? It makes me feel good, she responded. It makes me feel not fat. Is this something that occurs at home too? I asked. Yes, she replied. My mom holds the garbage can for me as I throw up. This experience led me to ask quite a few questions. What is the main cause of eating disorders in adolescents? How does social isolation experienced during COVID-19 affect the eating habits and mental health of a growing adolescent? How does the lack of regularly scheduled interpersonal interaction affect the development of an adolescent? How has the increased use of social media during the pandemic altered the perception of beauty standards among adolescents? What are the long-term effects COVID-19 has on the overall adolescent experience? Due to the lack of research in this area and given the recency of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was able to measure the impact of the pandemic on the development of adolescents. Before diving any deeper, it is important that I define what an eating disorder is. An eating disorder can be best defined as a distorted vision of the way one views their body, as well as the overall feelings towards eating, food, and weight. Eating disorders can present themselves in a series of ways. The American Psychiatric Association defines an eating disorder as behavioral conditions characterized by severe and persistent disturbance in eating behaviors and associated distressing thoughts and emotions. This can be very serious conditions, affecting physical, psychological, and social function. It also states that eating disorders can occur at any age and affect any gender. There are three main types of eating disorders: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. Though I recognize there are more eating disorders, these are the eating disorders that my research will be focusing on. Anorexia nervosa is the ability to lose weight at a rapid speed and become underweight for someone their age or height. People with anorexia have an implicit fear of being overweight, which is why these individuals resort to starvation and purging. They also have extreme dieting regimens and exercise routines. Bulimia nervosa is the ability to binge or eat copious amounts of food in a short period of time, and the ability to immediately retract what was consumed, whether it be through purging or through using laxatives. Binge eating is a condition where somebody regularly eats copious amounts of food. They are out of control and they cannot stop eating. They tend to eat until they are uncomfortably full and eat in the comfort of their own home, alone, so nobody can see them. The events of COVID-19 led to many causes of eating disorders. This includes the sudden change in routine and schedule, the support system at home and accessibility to resources, the deterioration of mental health, and social media, to name a few. University of Michigan Health C.S. Mott Children's Hospital Dr. Otto stated, changes to adolescents' day-to-day lives during the pandemic, such as school closures and cancellation of organized sports, may also disrupt routines related to eating and exercise, and be an impetus for developing unhealthy eating behaviors among those already at risk. As for my research, I conducted a survey to determine the impact of COVID-19 and the effects social isolation and limitations had on adolescents. Using Google Forms as my platform, I posted on all 4 of the University of Massachusetts official Facebook groups for classes of 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025 to gauge an understanding among university students how they felt about their eating habits, self-esteem, and body image prior to COVID, post-COVID-19, and presently. I had 70 responses to my survey, and I ensure all of my participants' responses are anonymous, meaning I don't know who said what response. One of the most interesting factors of my findings in my research was that of gender identity. Of all the people I offered my survey to, 78.9% of the participants who did respond to my survey identified themselves as female. This shows how eating disorders are often stigmatized as a women's issue, when in reality, men and members of the LGBTQ+ community are not immune to eating disorders as well. When asked on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being that COVID did not affect their routine, 10 being that it affected their routine greatly, 36.6% of participants said that COVID greatly affected their daily routine or schedule. This complies with my research in that a sudden shift of routine does have an effect on the adolescent mind and their development. When asked what social media outlets did you find yourself going on during quarantine, the overwhelmingly majority response was TikTok. When asked what social media influencers or celebrities did you closely follow during quarantine, there were many responses, but some that were repetitive were the Kardashians, namely Kylie and Kim, Charli D'Amelio, and Emma Chamberlain, which were among the most highly suggested answers, and it's highly reflective of the trends today towards how women view their bodies. Also, when asked what notable TV shows and movies or any kinds of video content did you consume during quarantine, there were quite a variety of answers, but 2 categories of answers were quite popular. That of reality television, which encapsulates shows such as Survivor, Too Hot to Handle, Love Island, Love is Blind, and the Bachelor/Bachelorette franchise. The other genre of television that was highly noted on my survey was that of teen romance. Shows like Riverdale, Euphoria, Gossip Girl, Bridgerton, and Outer Banks all fall into this category. All these television shows have one aspect in common, which is the hypersexualization of women, especially where most of their participants are being clothed in bikinis or dresses, mainly to portray them as sexualized figures. It is an inaccurate portrayal of how society is presented, showing that only thin women have any prospects of finding love or romance in their lives, which then can influence other women to want to do the same. When asked to agree or disagree with the following statement, the way I view myself and my body changed drastically during quarantine and social isolation, 38% of participants answered somewhat agree, closely followed by a 36.6% who answered that they agree. This is all due to the factors that I've discussed, such as a change in routine and schedule, as well as the loss of self-identity during this time of self-isolation. Due to self-isolation and the closure of schools during COVID-19, it stunted the ability for these young children to form an identity for themselves. They were no longer the star quarterback of the football team or the lead in the musical. Young adults were forced into other ways of taking control of their narrative and forming an identity for themselves, which unfortunately results in adolescents turning to celebrities, other aspects of social media, in order to fill the void that social interaction has left behind. There are many influences and factors as to why COVID-19 contribute to an increase of eating disorders in adolescents nationwide. The lack of structure and routine has led some individuals to lose control of their lives, which eventually led for individuals to exercise and take control of their bodies. An increase in depression and anxiety surrounding social isolation and social distancing has given the opportunity for individuals who have eating disorders to relapse. The lack of accessibility to treatment facilities or family support deterred many from getting the help that they need. Social media was also a dominant factor as to why many young people developed an eating disorder during COVID, as a way to develop a sense of identity and compensate for the lack of interpersonal communication that once existed prior to the pandemic, as well as following the lead of many social media influencers and create a sense of belonging amongst their adolescent audiences that they are missing out on in person due to COVID. The global pandemic served as an instigator to starting a conversation about eating disorders in adolescents and just how multifaceted they are. That concludes my presentation. Thank you all so much for listening.